From Read Novel Bot Rebirth of a Genius. Creator, Destroyer. It is already dark when the five of them came back to the village. The roads are deserted as ever. So, nobody bothered with the blazing earth bowls accompanying the five people and a raven. They went to Sam's house and they left the bowls in the backyard and all five of them entered the house. All of them didn't even say a single word all this time. After all of them washed up, Philip and his teammates sat in the living room. They didn't even eat anything as they don't have any appetite. But at their cultivation level, they can make do with not eating for 2 to 3 days straight. Suddenly Sam appeared into the living room from his bedroom, in his casual wear. When they saw Sam's sleeveless vest, they were all a bit surprised as they weren't able to find any type of injury on his arms at all. It seems like the injury on the chest is the only injury now, which is just tied up with a gauge. Sam has a big leather pouch in his hands. He walked into the room and just looked at them in silence for a while. Even Philip and his teammates also didn't know what to say. After what seemed like an eternal silence, Sam finally spoke. "Thank you for not hitting me when I am down," Sam said as he bowed his head a bit. All of them seemed a bit surprised by his humble attitude. Until now all they understood is that Sam is a cold individual who has no emotions. But now they felt like they didn't know him at all. Then Sam continued, "I don't like to be with strangers often and can't make friends easily. That is the reason why I kept my distance from you. But from now on we can be friends," Sam said slowly. He meant everything he said. Even though he clearly knew that he would be saved with help of Yunwoo, Philip and his definitely not know of this. So, them being honest and leave the benefits of obtaining the 3 corpses of the magical beasts is not something anyone can do. Hearing what Sam has to say, Philip and his teammates heaved a long sigh. Then Philip smiled and extended his hand for a handshake. Sam shook his hand and smiled as well. Then Sam said again, "I don't know how much a corpse of beasts at that level, so please accept these as my compensation," Sam said as he put the big leather pouch on the table. "You don't need to, you said yourself we are friends, right? We don't need those kinds of formalities at all," Philip immediately rejected with a smile. From the side, Marvin also spoke. "Yes, you don't need to do that. Please, I insist," Sam said and then turned around and went to his bedroom. As soon as Sam left, Philip heard Paul sneering. "How big of compensation can he give? This bag at most contains 1,000 spirit stones, but those bodies at least get us more than 3,000 spirit stones." Even though he said that he was also a bit moved by what Sam did. They certainly can't force him for compensation. But he himself gave it to them voluntarily. As he spoke, he opened the bag and almost dropped it to the floor. Looking at Paul's expression, Philip walked over and saw inside the bag and he was also shocked. Fire elemental spirit stones, Paul said in amazement. Hearing that, both Marvin and Haley also felt rather shocked and immediately ran over as they wanted to confirm. After some time, all of them came out of their daze and looked at each other. Then Philip spoke slowly. "Right now, the exchange rate in the Starwood City is 6-1 for the fire elemental stones. So, this bag is worth 6,000 spiritual stones. Damn, he almost gave us double the price." If Sam heard this, he would have felt a pinch in his heart, as he didn't want to lose that much money just after he became rich. But Sam didn't know about this and just slept peacefully after 2 days. The next day after the sun rose, Sam woke up and washed up before he went into his backyard to look at the blazing earth bowls. But Philip and others already beat him to it. Sam saw Yunwoo, which is on his shoulders, to look at all the other 4 people vigilantly. Understanding his thoughts, Sam said with a smile, "Don't worry, they are our friends now." Sam then walked towards the other 4 and greeted them. "Good morning, you guys are early," he said with a smile. Looking at his smile, all of them felt stunned because the contrast in his character is too much for them to bear. They came out of their stupor and Marvin asked slowly, "Sam, why did you get these bowls here?" "Well, you guys already have your own steeds. So, I thought I should get one so that I won't drag you guys down in our journey today," Sam said with a straight face. Hearing this, all of them wanted to curse him badly. Using level 2 beasts is not that uncommon, but only their elders in the family have that privilege, but now a guy whose cultivation level is lower than them has 2 of them, and he is even saying to them that he got them in order to catch them up to their horses. Damn it. Now our horses will be the one that left behind. These beasts are at least 6 times faster than the normal horse. Even if they have a lot of weight on them, they can still manage to run 5 times faster. Normally Starwood City will take at least 4 days to reach on horses. But from the look of it, they can reach their destination in 1 day on these bulls. But the point is all of them don't have one. Suddenly Philip said from behind. Sam, I have borrowed a carriage for our journey from my family. Since you have the bulls, how about we connect these bulls to that carriage and leave? He asked with some anticipation. Entering the Starwood City with 2 middle-level magical beasts as their carriage steeds. Even his father doesn't have that privilege because generally, cultivators tame beasts to assist them in battle. So, nobody would try to use them for carriages. He also felt like Sam might not agree for the same reason. But unexpectedly Sam agreed. Sure, you make the preparations and we will set out early, Sam said as left to prepare. All 3 boys almost jumped in joy. Then they also left to prepare. After an hour or so, Sam and others were gathered outside as Sam carried the big bag on his shoulders while Yunwoo is resting on that bag, looking around curiously from a new viewpoint. There is a carriage waiting them which is full green in color and has a symbol of a tree in middle of the carriage. That is the crest of the Evergreen family. There are 2 blazing earth bulls attached to the carriage. Looking at the big bag Sam carrying, Philip said. For visiting, Sam, let's store these in my spatial ring. It will save some space inside the carriage. Sam nodded and Philip made the bag disappear. All of them boarded the carriage while Marvin took the reins to drive the carriage. Sam previously let Yunwoo command the bulls to hear every command of Marvin and others. So, they started their journey. Sam wanted to meet with Michael before leaving, but he was not home. So, he just left a note and left the city. After some time the carriage left the village through the only gate that connected the village to the cities. As they left the village, a guard immediately hurried over to the village head mansion and informed their departure to the village head. Village head smirked. Now that bastard Sam and those from the city will all die due to an attack from the bandits. So, I don't have to care as that has nothing to do with our village. He said to himself after the servant who reported to his left. Due to those twerps, I don't even have a single second of rest from the past few days. As he spoke, he glanced at the villagers who are still protesting for their taxes. He completely left the blame for these troubles on Sam and Philip for revealing his scheme. That is the reason he wanted to kill them so badly. Meanwhile, after Sam and others left the village they are traveling at a significant speed. Inside the carriage Philip, Sam, Haley and Paul sat while Marvin is controlling the carriage. While inside Philip is chatting with Paul and Haley stayed silent. But Sam is looking at a metallic piece of bone in his hands. This is the bone from the skeletal remains of the golden blood tiger he killed yesterday. He examined this bone closely. It has a metallic luster as it is just processed in shape of the bone. As Sam is examining the bone, Philip said from the side. Sam, these bones of the golden blood tiger are very useful for weapon forging. Even rank 2 artisan will have a hard time to completely melt the bone. So, they usually use the bones to directly forge the weapons instead of using it for casting. Even though the rank 3 artisans can melt these bones are not suitable for rank 3 treasures. So, they won't do with these types of bones. Sam nodded his head and closed his eyes. Thinking about what Philip said, he started thinking. Artisans are one of the most important professions in this world. Basically, there are 2 types of artisans. One type is weapon artisans, who are responsible for forging or casting weapons. A rank 1 weapon artisan should have 2 important qualities. First one is they should have to be fire attribute mage and the second one is they should be at least have a cultivation base of acolyte. The artisans are respected highly in this world. Even the city lord of Starwood City should treat the rank 2 artisans as his equals. There is another type called scholar artisans. These artisans mainly design new things to improve the lifestyle as well as solve various problems. They don't have any restrictions on their certifications, but any design or weapon that they design should meet the standards set by the predecessors. The Artisan Guild is in charge of certifying these artisans. The Artisan Guild is an independent organization and doesn't come under the jurisdiction of the royal authority. But they won't just recklessly cause trouble. After thinking about this for a while, Sam started concentrating again on the bone. This bone is the one he broke when he caught the tiger off guard. He slowly started spreading his spiritual energy into the bone and started concentrating on it just like he concentrated on the bull corpse. He could clearly see the granular structure of the metallic bone and started observing it closely. After concentrating a little more, he could clearly see the bond between the grains. After observing for a while, Sam took out a fire elemental spirit stone and started observing it the same way. After observing both bone and the spiritual stone, Sam came into a conclusion. The spiritual particles which form the spiritual energy can be classified into 4 different states: active, passive, stable, unstable. The spiritual energy in the spiritual stones is in passive state, but it is extremely stable. The spiritual energy in the objects like metals and rocks will become passive after achieving an elemental nature and is also extremely stable. If the stability of the spiritual energy which maintains the bonds becomes unstable, the structure will collapse. After thinking up to this point, Sam started to concentrate even more on the bondage between the granular structure and tried to manipulate the spiritual energy just like how he manipulated the surrounding energy yesterday when attacking the tiger. As he increased his concentration, his veins bulged on his forehead as sweat started dripping from it. Other people also looked towards Sam as they observed his condition. Suddenly, the bone in Sam's right hand turned into powder and fell on the ground. All the other 3 gasped in shock as they saw the bone turn onto powder. Just then Sam suddenly opened his eyes and also saw the powdered bone while panting. His mental energy is completely exhausted. He smirked upon realizing his conjecture is correct. He involuntarily looked at the spiritual stone in his other hand and a thought came into his mind, but he immediately rejected, since he is afraid of the consequences. He looked at all the other 3 and didn't say anything and collected the bone powder to a small pouch and started meditating to recover. Philip stopped chatting and just looked at the pouch. After some hours passed, Sam opened his eyes. "How did you do that?" Philip immediately asked. "Do what?" Sam asked, feigning ignorance. Philip increased his voice and pointed at the pouch and asked again. "That." Sam just shook his head and stayed silent. Looking at this, Philip stopped asking. But he still felt restless inside. He knew how difficult it is to cut or melt the golden blood tiger bone, not to mention powder. Because he is also aspiring to become an artisan. He is currently trying to be an apprentice of the head of the Artisan Guild in the Starwood City, who is a rank 2 artisan. Another side, Haley also visibly stunned by the feat Sam has done. But she is more stable than Philip. Just as they are in their own thoughts, the carriage stopped. Marvin's shout came from outside. "Ambush!" They immediately jumped outwards of the carriage and looked at 2 people fully covered in black clothing and wearing masks standing and talking to each other. They came early and they have the level 2 beasts with them. One guy in black said to the other. Sam also came of the carriage and looking at the 2 assailants, he again went inside the carriage, removed the black coat and laid it on the 2 panther cubs who are sleeping. They didn't open their eyes yet, since their birth. Sam came outside again and looked at the 2 men in black coldly. These 2 are at 7th stage of acolyte and looked at Sam and others and threatened. "Leave everything on you and we will let you live," one guy in black said. Sam didn't even speak to them and coldly said, "Attack!" Suddenly both the blazing earth bulls shot a huge ball of fire from their mouths directly towards the 2 men. When they saw these, they immediately panicked and turned back to flee. They clearly didn't think that the bulls are of level 2 middle stage. They thought that they are only at initial stage, that is why they tried this ambush. Right now all they wanted to do was curse the village head to death. When the guys are about to follow the 2 men, Sam stopped and said, "You can't capture them. Their cultivation levels are higher and we better don't push our luck." All the others nodded. "If we push a cultivator to a life and death situation, they might do something crazy which will inevitably cause damage on both sides. So, they continued on their journey. When they boarded back, Sam wore the coat again and placed the two little pups in his embrace. They snuggled against him and found a comfortable spot to sleep. Even though the magical beasts will grow up faster, it will still take some time for them to grow up from the infant stage. During the infant stage, the mother will feed the cubs with her spiritual energy until they can grow enough to eat on their own. Right now Sam is doing the same thing and looked at the two cubs with warm smile. Watching this scene, Haley's heart skipped a beat. The smile on the Sam's handsome face will make any girl's heart beat faster. Same thing happened to her as she saw smiling like that. His devilishly handsome face with his perfect skin tone and the contrasting black outfit gave him an impeccable look that makes every boy envy him and every girl adore him. At this movement, Philip chuckled and looked at Haley with a meaningful smile. Haley immediately got out of her daze and immediately hid her face, which is blushing in embarrassment. Sam didn't even notice this as he just looked at the cubs. The next day in the morning, by the time sun rose, a green carriage belonging to the Evergreen family could be seen at the borders of Starwood City. Sam and the others traveled the entire night as Paul took the rein of the carriage in the middle of the night. Now they can see the city gates from afar. Soon Sam and the others arrived near the city gate. The guards watching the gates could clearly see the carriage with two level 2 beasts rushing towards them at full speed. They panicked for a moment and looked for their supervisor. By the time their supervisor arrived, the carriage reached the city gates and stopped there. The supervisor watched the Evergreen crest and heaved a sigh of relief. The nobles of the Evergreen family are the easiest of all the people to deal with. So, he walked towards the carriage, and when he saw Paul at the control he frowned, and then he saw Philip and Haley get down along with Sam and Marvin. Philip walked towards the supervisor and asked, "Officer, can you open the gates for me?" Philip asked, "Young Master Philip, I was a bit startled when the guards saw that there is two level 2 beasts used to drag a carriage. Now that I have seen it is you, I am relieved." The supervisor smiled and said. Then he looked at Sam and said again, "Young Master Philip, may I know who he is?" "Well, he is my friend, he is not a resident of the city." "So, you might not have seen him." Philip replied, "Young Master Philip, you know the procedure, right? He should pay the entry fee." The supervisor said as he pointed at Sam. "And for these beasts also, you need to pay." "Well, how much is that?" "I will pay," Philip said. Now only he remembered about this and looked rather awkward. The supervisor also only asked directly because it was Philip. Philip is known for his humility and friendliness. If it is any other young noble, he would first let them pass through and then send the bill to their steward. Before Philip could pay, Sam interrupted. "I will pay by myself. May I know how much is it in total for my entry along with these beasts?" Sam said as he showed the two panther cubs and Yunwu at the same time along with the bulls. The supervisor was left in a daze for some time as he looked at the number of beasts at the same time. Looking at them, he gulped and said with a shaking voice, "May I know your cultivation?" Hearing this, Sam didn't say anything and just released his aura. Only at first stage acolyte, and he has this many magical beast pets. He inwardly thought and said to Sam, "If you are going to stay permanently, you have to pay 1 spiritual stone for you and 2 for each of you bulls, 1 for the bird and 1 for both the cubs. So, a total of 8 spiritual stones." Here, Sam immediately threw 2 fire elemental spiritual stones towards the supervisor, who immediately caught them and stared at them in shock. Sam didn't care about his expression and spread his hand for the change. The supervisor came out of the daze and returned 4 normal spiritual stones which Sam kept in his pocket. Then Sam got a total of 5 tokens, which he kept in his pocket and boarded the carriage along with others. Soon, they arrived at the Evergreen family house. Since it is early in the morning, only a few people noticed the carriage with 2 level 2 beasts. After they got out of the carriage, Haley and Marvin left their own homes. Only Paul, Philip and Sam entered the Evergreen family house. Philip arranged a guest room for Sam and left. Sam took a nap for 2 hours and woke up. He washed up and came outside and started looking for Philip. After searching for a few minutes, he finally found Philip in the hallway of the Evergreen family. He is talking to a middle-aged man, and when Sam came inside, they both of them saw him. Philip smiled at Sam and gestured him to come. Sam went towards and stood beside Philip. "You must be Sam," the middle-aged man, who seemed to be in his early 40s, said with a smile as he examined Sam from head to toe, with a sharp gaze. Sam felt like the middle-aged man in front of him can see through him entirely. "Sam, this is my father, the head of the Evergreen Pavilion. Marcus Evergreen," Philip introduced. "Hello," Sam just nodded his head. Seeing this, Marcus lifted his eyebrows a bit with surprise. No, because he felt offended, but because it has been many years since someone has not bowed in front of him to suck upon every chance they get when they knew he was the head of the Evergreen Pavilion. The young man before him has shown utter disregard for his position. "Interesting," he mumbled under his breath and spoke to Sam. "Philip said you have an amazing talent in cultivating and came to Starwood City to join in the Starwood Academy. There are still 2 months for admissions. So, you can stay in the Evergreen house if you want until then." "No need, Mr. Marcus. I will stay outside. I am planning on buying a house. I like to stay alone most of the time. So, I won't implore on you. Anyway, thanks for the offer." Sam rejected immediately. Hearing this, Marcus didn't say anything and looked at Sam again and said to Philip, "Take Sam to have breakfast and show him around the city." Then he nodded towards Sam and then walked away. "Let's go. Haley and Marvin will come at any time. We should get ready to leave," Philip said as he dragged Sam towards the dining hall. Marcus arrived at a meeting room to attend the morning meeting. The Evergreen Pavilion is an auction house that houses auctions for various magical weapons, artifacts, pills, etc. These auctions will be held randomly for various occasions depending on the items they had in store. And every month there would be a grand auction, which will have more valuable and collectible treasures, and there will be even more grand auction in for every year. Today is a day which they chose to hold the monthly auction. The monthly auction will not be necessarily held on same day of every month. It may be held on any day of the latter half of the month depending on the availability of the items. That is the reason they are having a meeting now to discuss the plans for today. When Marcus arrived, everyone in the room stood up and dipped into a bow. "All of you take a seat," Marcus said as he took the head seat. Soon they started discussing things about the auction. When meeting was about to end, one of the elders rose up and spoke. "Pavilion head, I heard Philip brought along with him 2 mid-level level 2 beasts with him. The blazing earth bulls of this level are hard to find. So, how about we auction them today? They don't belong to my son. Those belong to a friend of his," Marcus said as looked at the elder with a sharp gaze. "I also heard that his friend is only from a village, no? I also heard he has 2 cubs of panther-type magical beasts. If we ask him to sell them to our auction house, I don't think he will refuse. After all, he doesn't have the capability to refuse anyway. Even if we force him to do th." Before he finished speaking, the elder felt an immense pressure bore down on him. Marcus is a peak stage novice mage and the elder is only at 3rd novice mage. So, his face paled in horror. "Don't talk about this anymore. Otherwise, I will kick you out of the family," Marcus said coldly. Elder nodded his head in agreement. Actually, the elder doesn't have any guts to ask these questions. But some senior elders who are at the late stage novice mage has their eyes on the beast pets of Sam. So, they just wanted to test waters with this elder as a scapegoat. Now that they learnt the attitude of Marcus, they immediately lost all the ideas on the pets. The Evergreen family is most united and clean family in the city and they all respected the pavilion head a lot. So, they immediately left all the thoughts on the beasts. Then the meeting ended and everyone left to do their works. Meanwhile, Sam along with the other 4 is already on the streets of Starwood City. Sam left the cubs at Evergreen family and left Yunwu there to take care of them. Philip is taking Sam on a tour all over the city to show him various places. Sam suddenly asked, "Where is Crimson Flame family?" Philip was stunned for a second and asked, "Why, Ms. Freya gave me this token when we did business before. So, I just wanted to go and pay a visit to her since I am already in the city. Sam said as showed the token. Philip looked the token and said, "Oh, Freya even gave you a guest token. Sam, do you perhaps like her or something?" Even Haley started listening attentively as she waited for answer. Even she herself doesn't know why she was concerned about. But all they saw is the cold face of Sam with a frown. Then Philip immediately waved his hand and started acting as if he never asked the question in the first place. They took another way and started walking towards Crimson Flame family. Just as they were about to enter the Crimson Flame family, a young lady came out of the gate in an elegant dress. The lady has a red hair and oval face and jade-like skin is in complete contrast with her hair and dress, which gave her charm an extra touch. Her long legs and voluptuous figure were greatly highlighted by the dress she wore. The overall look gave her a noble air which makes all the girls grit their teeth in envy and all the young men drool over her. She is none other than Freya, and the dress she wore is precisely one of the dresses Sam had made. As she came outside, everyone's attention on the streets was diverted towards her, but her attention was diverted towards a group of 5 people. She hurriedly walked towards them as she greeted them. "Hey Philip, you guys came back already," Freya shouted in excitement as she neared them. Even before Philip answered, Freya walked towards Haley and spoke. "Yo, Haley, how is my new dress? This is also made by the same tailor. I already told you, if you request me cutely, I will definitely take you to the tailor." Freya bragged as she placed her hand around Haley's shoulder. Haley immediately pushed her hand and said coldly, "You don't have to worry about it anymore," Haley said as she pointed at Sam. At first, Freya didn't notice Sam since he changed the way he dressed and his aura is also completely changed. But when Haley pointed at him, she immediately realized who the person is. Her expression became awkward for a second. Sam also didn't know what to say and only said after a while, "Hello, Ms. Freya, nice to see you again." "Ha, Sam, it is really you." Freya immediately came out of her stupor and immediately looked from up and down and said slowly, "You can cultivate?" Everyone was dumbstruck by the question. "What do you mean you can cultivate? He is a monster." This is the thought in everyone's mind. Then Freya immediately screamed in low voice as she asked another completely different thing. "Sam, what are you wearing? It looks great. Did you make it yourself?" Freya asked as she examined the coat Sam wearing closely. Everyone was stunned as they looked at her sudden changes except for Haley, who shook her head for the antics of her friend and pulled her backwards. Freya shook of her hand and said frantically, "Sam, you should make me a few dresses like that. I love that pattern more than the previous dresses you made. Don't worry, I won't ask for more. Just a dozen dresses will do." "No way. Mr. Sam already promised that he would take my request for dresses a priority." "And what do you mean by dozen dresses? Do you know how much effort Mr. Sam has to make to create one dress like that? We all saw with our own eyes, he stayed up a whole night to make that single cloth he is wearing right now," Haley said as she pointed at Sam's coat. "What? You saw him make the dress? Sam, this is clearly discriminating." "I don't care. Since you discriminated, you should take my request as priority," Freya said without any shame. "Freya, how can you be so shameless?" Haley scolded from the side. Watching this, all the boys have wry smiles on their faces. They looked at the 2 goddesses of the city fighting over a tailor to make a dress. They even doubted their meaning of lives. Maybe the tailor is the greatest profession, they thought as they looked at Sam. Sam then coughed dryly to grab the attention of the 2 maidens in an argument. When they turned towards him, he spoke. "Ms. Freya, I already made a few dresses for you. So, what Ms. Haley said is right. And it is not really possible to make a dozen dresses like that. Even the feathers required will be hard to find. And I still have to find a place to live, before we talk about anything." Sam spoke with a straight face. Then only both the ladies stopped arguing, but still sparks flew whenever their gazes met. They started their tour again, but this time they have Freya also tagging them. Philip took Sam several houses for sale, but Sam didn't like them at all. After looking till the noon, they stopped at an inn to have lunch. Sam, why don't you come to my Crimson Flame family and stay there? I will arrange a shop for you and you can do the business whenever you are free, even after you join the academy. Freya said while eating. Sam didn't answer and just shook his head. Then Philip spoke. In what price range are you looking for? Philip asked. As long as the place is nice, price is not an issue, Sam spoke flatly. Freya was a bit surprised as she knew that Sam, she knew doesn't have much money, but when she saw the other 4 people doesn't seem surprised, she just stayed silent. Then, I have a place in mind. But the place is not a normal house, but a small mansion. At least it is the same size of your village head's mansion. Do you want to take a look? Philip asked. Brother, do you mean, that place? Paul asked from the side slowly. Philip just nodded and waited for Sam's reply. Sure, Sam replied, and all of them finished their lunch quickly and left the inn. After walking for an hour, they arrived at the mansion that Philip mentioned. This mansion belongs to our Evergreen family. We recently built it and are auctioning it today evening, Philip said as he showed the mansion. The mansion is at the bank of a river which is flowing through the city. The mansion has a big compound around it. It has a large space big enough to host any even in its backyard. The spiritual energy in this place is very high. It is very beneficial for mages and warriors who are yet to enter the novice stage. When the Evergreen Pavilion discovered this place, they immediately applied for the rights to develop this place and now they are selling this in auction. 50% of the profit will go to city and 50% belongs to Evergreen Pavilion. There are many people who are looking at the mansion. Most of them are the young nobles in the city. When Sam and the others are looking at the mansion, a young man came towards them and spoke to Freya. Hello, Freya, you look as beautiful as always, he said, ignoring all the other people in the group. I know, Freya said indifferently. The young man who spoke earlier didn't know how to reply as he stared awkwardly. Then he looked at Philip and greeted him. Hello Philip, I heard you came with a big haul from this hunt. I heard you got back with 2 level 2 magical beasts as your ride. The young man said to Philip, a bit envious. They are not mine, Raymond. They belong to my friend who is right here, Philip said as he pointed towards Sam. The man named Raymond looked at Sam and looked at him from head to toe. Sam didn't even bother to take a look back and just kept on looking towards the mansion. Who might you be? Raymond asked haughtily, his tone filled with arrogance. But Sam didn't reply. I already told you, he is my friend Sam. He is from Lava Rock Village, Philip said as he looked at Sam. Oh, just a country bumpkin, Raymond said condescendingly. Then, it would be easy. Name a price for both your beasts. And don't you dare be unreasonable. Sam then looked at Raymond with a cold look and didn't reply. He really didn't like this guy. Sam then turned towards Philip and spoke. Let's go, and then turned around to leave. Raymond immediately lost his cool. He is a young noble of Starwood City. He is also a genius of Starwood Academy who is at 2nd level mage acolyte at 16 years of age, and now a country bumpkin is daring enough to ignore him. You little piece of shit. Come and stand here right now and apologize. Otherwise don't even dream of having a good time in the city. Raymond shouted on top of his lungs, then all the people around looked towards him. A young man whose features are similar to Raymond came forward and walked towards Raymond. Philip and his group also stopped. Sam looked at Philip and others and said, we don't have to care about every dog that barks on the street. As he said that, he turned around and started walking. Philip didn't seem that surprised. When he turned around and was about walk, he heard another voice. Philip, your friend doesn't seem to know manners. Just a country bumpkin at 1st stage acolyte and is still so arrogant. Haley, you should keep your distance away from them and hang around with people of a higher standard. His voice was not loud, but everyone can hear it clearly. Haley didn't bother to reply and stared at him coldly. Sam turned around to take a look and saw a young man who resembled Raymond slightly and standing near Raymond. He is Leonard from Greyhound family. He is elder brother of Raymond and is a 5th stage acolyte mage. Marvin said to Sam, afraid he would do something rash. You, country bumpkin, come and apologize right now, and we will let it go. Leonard continued. Sam looked at Philip and said, I already told you. There is no need to mind every dog that barks. Then he turned around again. Philip let out a chuckle and also turned around. Freya looked at Leonard gloatingly as she started walking back. Leonard just stood there stupefied. He looked at all the people who are whispering and looking at him. He gritted his teeth as he felt like he lost a great deal of face. All he wanted was to just bash the head of that guy, but he refrained himself from doing, as it will only embarrass himself more. Both the brothers left the place with shame. Meanwhile, Sam, you changed a lot. I didn't know you are this cool. That look on Leonard's face is priceless. Ha ha ha, Freya laughed as she spoke. Rest of the group didn't seem surprised at all, as they already saw how Sam will behave firsthand. All of them went to the Evergreen family house and stayed there. Sam immediately went to his room to check on the two cubs. Yunwoo immediately flew onto his shoulder. Philip and others came inside the room. The two cubs who were asleep until a minute ago opened their eyes as they looked at Sam and others. This is the first time they opened their eyes, and Sam felt happy as he looked at the two cute cubs with sparkling eyes. The two cubs slowly stood up and walked towards him. Sam looked at them and picked them up. They snuggled into his warm embrace, and looking at them, Sam gave a warm smile. All the other people looked at the scene, which looked like it came from a painting. Both the girls in the room felt their heartbeat quickening. Sam looked so handsome now with a smile. They doubted if they were really the same person. They came out of their daze and looked at each other and blushed as they became embarrassed. Freya then looked at the Black Panther cubs, which looked like cute cats, and went over. Oh, Sam, they look so cute. How about you give them to me? I will take good care of them, Freya said as she reached out her arm and tried to pat the heads of the cubs. But both of them ducked their heads to avoid her hand. Looking at the scene, everyone burst into laughter. Even Haley let out a low chuckle. She also liked the cubs. But they are fire type and her attribute will be repelled by them. So, she didn't try. Freya pouted her lips unhappily and looked at Sam. Sam, your cubs embarrassed me. So, you better make up to it by making my dress earlier, she said shamelessly. Sam just shook his head and just started sharing his fire-type spiritual energy to the cubs. Yunwoo just rested on Sam's shoulder. All of them chatted as they waited for the evening. Sam along with Philip and others came to the Evergreen Pavilion in the city center. The Evergreen Pavilion is bustling with people as there are so many who came to the monthly auction. Sam and Philip went inside and sat in a private room. There are a total of 10 private rooms which are all filled. Soon the auction started. Everyone, I am your host today. I first want to thank you all for your patronage and showing your support for our Evergreen Pavilion. The host is beautiful woman in her early 20s. She is my big sister Eva, Philip said to Sam from the side. Sam indifferently nodded. He really didn't care who the host was. The first item for today's auction is a sword. This sword is obtained from the pavilion head with much difficulty. This is made by the famous rank 2 artisan Sylvester. This is a grade 2 sword that has a sharpness inscription of rank 2 and is made of fire steel. This is really suitable for acolyte and novice warrior mages. The host introduced the sword and the crowd started discussing immediately. The starting bid is 100 spirit stones and with at least 10 stones in increment. Host finished the increment and soon the bidding started. 100, 110, 130, 140, 200. Suddenly everyone became silent. Everyone turned towards a private room. The room belonged to the Crimson Flame family. As soon as the bid was heard, everyone became silent. 200 spirit stones once, twice and sold. The host confirmed the bid and proceeded next item. Freya, seems like you have a new sword, Marvin said to Freya from the side. Freya merely smiled. Even though there are other people from the same generation as her in the family, she is the most talented of all. So, the sword will naturally belong to her. She is 3rd stage acolyte warrior mage with fire attribute. So, the sword is naturally suitable to her. Meanwhile, the auction started again. Sam didn't seem to be interested in anything. For visiting. After 2 hours the finale of the auction came. Now, the most awaited finale of the auction came. It is the Riverside Mansion. It has a cultivation environment most suitable for acolytes and the scenery of the house is also great. The house is specially designed by our architect and carefully supervised by our evergreen pavilion. The host introduced as a painting with the house is brought onto the stage. There is a scroll which is the deed of land which was also brought onto the stage. The host continued. The starting bid of the mansion is 3,000 spirit stones and each bid should be of 100 increment in minimum. As soon as she finished the bidding started. 3,000, 3,200, 3,500, 3,800, 4,000. The bidding is going on like that. Meanwhile Sam is silent the whole time. Philip others worried a little as Sam stayed silent. They thought that Sam stayed silent because he doesn't have enough. Sam, you can take the spirit stones you gave us before and buy the house. You can return later, Philip said. Sam didn't reply and just smiled. 8,000. Suddenly a voice came and everyone became silent. The voice came from the Greyhound private room. Even the voice is familiar to Sam. It is none other than Raymond who bid. Real bidding starts now, Sam muttered in low voice. Philip and other felt a little surprised. Then another voice came. 9,000. This time it is Crimson Flame family. Now only Philip and others realized what Sam meant. These noble families are waiting to bid and didn't even bother to fight with the small fries. Even though the noble families have a good enough cultivation environment in their houses, they can't provide it to all younger generation. So, if they have another place like this mansion, it will increase their strength. That is the reason they are all bidding. Philip and others only realized it now. 10,000. Another bid came. This is Hartfield family, which is another noble family in the city. 11,000, 12,000, 15,000. Each noble family is trying to outbid each other. 18,000. This time even noble families surrendered. This is from the Greyhound family. They seem to be determined to obtain the mansion. Just as everyone thought the bid is done, another voice came. 20,000. Sam bid in a leisurely voice. Everyone in the auction room was dumbstruck. Even Philip and others in the room are also stunned. They didn't expect Sam to bid such high amount. Everyone turned to the private room which has no label. This is actually a spare room, but it seemed to be open today. Everyone thought. Meanwhile in Greyhound family room Leonard's expression turned unsightly. He clearly remembered the voice. Then he came to his senses and raised the bid. 21,000, 25,000. Sam raised the bid again and with a large margin. This time Leonard gritted his teeth and said loudly, "Don't push your luck. Bid or shut the fuck up," Sam said in a cold voice. Everyone was dumbstruck and inwardly thought, "You got balls." Alright, very few people in the city would dare to say shut the fuck up to Leonard. And it seemed that one who bid is just that person. 26,000, Leonard raised the bid again. 30,000, Sam didn't back down at all. This time even Leonard stayed silent. Once, twice, sold. Host finally confirmed the bid and auction was over. Those people who bid for the items went to collect the items and left while some stayed behind. They are curious to see who the person who cursed at Leonard. And they seem interested. Sam finally came when most of the people left. He slowly walked to the table and took a large bag full of spirit stones out of thin air. This time he didn't have to care about showing a spatial treasure because Philip gave him a spatial ring this morning, saying that this is for the excess spirit stones he gave as compensation. So, he accepted. He placed the leather bag on the table and asked the manager, "What is the exchange rate for fire spirit stones?" Everyone was dumbfounded after hearing that. Even Freya was surprised. Fire spirit stones are hot in demand in this area. That is the reason Starwood City went to great lengths to obtain the Lava Rock Village. But they weren't able to find a single fire spirit stone. The manager came out of his stupor and said, 1 to 6, the manager said as he stared at the bag while gulping hard. Sam opened the bag and quickly started separating. He then poured more than half of the bag on the table and kept the rest of them. There are 5,000 stones in total on table and Sam felt quite reluctant. But he still needed to get the house. Under the surprised expressions of all the people, Sam took the deed of the house and left with Philip and others. Sam along with Philip and others went to his newly bought mansion. The mansion inside is really good and the concentration of spiritual energy is higher than outside by many times. The scenery from the front balcony is really good as the river right beside the mansion and the distant mountains are really great to look at. All of them came to this mansion to celebrate. After they ate dinner, they sat together in the living room and chatted leisurely. I will be going somewhere tomorrow. I will be back in a month. So, all of you guys can stay in the mansion if you want. Sam said. Everyone became silent. After all, they didn't expect Sam to go outside the city. The very next day he bought a house. This is somewhat unexpected. Why don't we go together? Philip asked. No need. It is personal. Sam didn't explain further. Then Sam turned towards the two girls and spoke. Ms. Haley, Ms. Freya, after I come back, I will make the dresses I promised you, Sam said with a smile. Both the girls didn't reply and just nodded their heads. After chatting for some time, everyone left the place other than Sam, Yunwoo and the cubs. He left the bowls at the Evergreen family. Sam then entered the bedroom. The mansion is already fully furnished and he climbed up the large bed and closed his eyes peacefully. While Sam is sleeping peacefully, the noble families in the city are not sleeping at all. The fire elemental spiritual stones gave everyone a great shock. Every noble family in the city knew the value of the fire elemental stones in this place. Especially, the Crimson Flame family. They have a large number of fire attribute cultivators in the Crimson Flame family. The Crimson family is one of the main recipients of the fire spiritual stones. So, as soon as Freya went home, she was immediately summoned to the main hall where family meetings were heard. As she entered the room, she saw the family patriarch and other elders sitting there silently with a solemn expression. Freya, who is that person that used the fire spirit stones? How do you know him? An elder asked impatiently as soon as Freya entered the hall. Freya frowned as she heard the elder's tone and immediately felt displeased. She immediately turned to her father, who is the patriarch of the family. But he didn't seem to see his daughter's displeasure and gave a look which is expecting her to answer. This made Freya even more angry, but she gritted her teeth and said, He is a friend from the Lava Rock village. We had a business deal before. Now he came to city to enter Starwood Academy. Hearing this, many elders' frown eased. One of the elders said with a commanding tone, Invite him to Crimson Flame family tomorrow. We have something to talk to him. Why? She asked with a frown. We have a deal for him. We need the fire spirit stones from him. The elder replied. Why do our family need to buy from him? We are not short on wealth, right? She inquired further, but there is no reply. What she said is indeed right. The Crimson Flame family really doesn't have any shortage of wealth. But the fire spirit stones are different altogether. As they are fire cultivators, the fire spirit stones will have a higher rate of absorption and the energy inside their body will have less impurities. They are extremely beneficial to fire cultivators, particularly the younger generation at acolyte stage, and it will give them a solid foundation. So, they could advance further. The fire spirit stones are really scarce in this region, and even with their connections there are only 100 stones which can be imported to the city every 3 months. So, a cultivator with no background and a lot of fire spirit stones is too big of a juicy meat they can't miss. That is the reason they can't leave this offer. But Freya's answer immediately made them stand up from the chairs. He is going to leave the city tomorrow. He said that he has something to take care. So, he will be leaving early in the morning. As soon as she finished, all opened their eyes in disbelief and immediately sent orders to visit Sam's mansion now. Looking at their reactions, Freya finally understood what is going on and she immediately regretted saying what she already said. She looked at her father, who was silent from the start, and spoke slowly. I am really disappointed in our family, father, she said as she left the hall and went to rest. Similar scenes happened in the Evergreen and Heartfield families. The Heartfield family has same reaction as the Crimson Flame family. Even though they are not completely fire attributed clan like the Crimson Flame, they still have a lot of fire attribute mages. So, they also set their eyes on him. The City Lord Mansion even went a bit further and even sent people to Lava Rock Village to inspect how Sam got the fire spirit stones. The Greyhound family also sent people to mansion. Because the young masters of the family can't swallow the embarrassment they brought upon themselves. So, they sent people to take care of Sam. Finally, the Evergreen household has different reactions. This is because their head ordered them not to get near Sam again after they held a meeting just like the Crimson Flame family. The second reason is they already got a total of 2,500 fire spirit stones already. If they get too greedy, they might get into trouble. That is why the elders also stayed silent when Patriarch ordered them to stay put. For visiting. Riverside Mansion. Several black shadows can be seen moving swiftly in the dark of the night. They slowly entered the mansion and started searching. When they reached, all the members looked at each other and reached a tacit understanding. They will finish the job first and then think who gets what. They immediately pushed open the bedroom door and were only greeted with an empty bed. They realized this person is swift than their households. Then they returned to their households. As soon as they left the house, a black raven slowly flew in the mansion and directly dashed towards the bed and disappeared in front of a transparent blue crystal on which is now fixed in between various gems of the headboard of the bed. Inside the divine dimension, Sam is standing at the window of the first floor of the tower and looking outside. Yinwu entered the divine dimension and flew through the window and landed in front of Sam. It reverted back to his original majestic golden sun crow form, and now Sam has to keep his head up to look at the eyes of the huge beast. Every family except the Evergreen and the City Lord Mansion came. Yinwu said to Sam. Sam didn't say anything at all and just nodded. Then he said after some silence, "I will be inside the tower for a few days and I won't be coming outside unless there is an emergency. So, I want you cultivate as well. Now that our cultivation levels are linked, you just focus on the cultivation and I will be practicing some techniques. I need to increase my cultivation level as soon as possible. And take care of other beasts as well. Bring some food for the bulls and the little ones, panther cubs. Try to plant some herbs that are useful for cultivation," Sam said. After a brief pause, he said, "Collect your feces in the volcanic zone." Sam said as looked at Yinwu was a bit confused but still nodded. Then he left to accomplish what Sam asked him to. Sam already guessed the moves of the noble households, that is the reason he immediately moved to Divine Dimension. He turned around and looked at the divine wills in the shelves and walked over to the martial arts shelves. Sam didn't really like the martial arts with the fixed moves. He believed that as long as a person his weapon, which might be a sword, a saber, a knife and even his own fists, every move he made with them will be a martial arts move. Even though he felt the same way in his previous life, he still learned some fixed martial arts to understand his own body properly, to use it with efficiency. He finally created a fighting style of his own, which solely depends on his understanding of his own body and anatomy of the human being. That is the deboning technique, which highly complements his own claw-type weapons. His fighting style is never registered and it never got to outside world in his previous life as he never taught it to anyone. Sam then looked at the shelf and muttered, "I need to use another type of fighting style and use my own fighting style as a trump card. The less people to know my style, the better." He then selected 2 wisps which were labeled like this: Monkey's Staff Insights and Who Archery Insights. Seeing the title, Sam felt a little confused and looked at the other wisps and they are mentioned as insights. Finally, Sam found a wisp with no label. He took the wisp in his hands and sent his spiritual sense. The wisp dissolved into him and a string of entered into his mind. "I don't want to spoil you by spoon-feeding the martial arts to you. Try creating a few of your own Ling Tian." Looking at the words, Sam didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But quickly threw the thoughts to the back of his head and just took the wisps and absorbed them. They also disappeared. Sam then sat cross-legged and started going through the newly acquired memories. A majestic human silhouette appeared in his mind as he started moving his staff. The staff felt like it was the body part of the person. Not like an external weapon. The silhouette moved the staff in whatever way he liked. There is no complex stance, no elegant moves, no fancy technique. Every move is unique and simple in its own way. After the performance is done, Sam heard a few words. A staff is a profound yet simple weapon. There are no rules on how to use your staff. Just like how nobody can say how you want to use your own hands. As long as you want to use it in any way you want. There is no right no wrong in the way of staff. You can use it in barbaric way like a club, or you can use it to perform fancy moves. After he heard the words, Sam slowly opened his eyes and recalled the words of the person and started contemplating. Then Sam stood up and went to the shelf named Inscriptions and Formations. He was confused why both of them are combined. There are total of 10 wisps and he took the first one and absorbed it. Then he entered the second floor for simulating room without looking through the memories. After Sam entered the simulating room, he sat cross-legged to digest the new information. Outside world. The day after the auction. The whole city is waiting for the news about what happened to Sam. They learned that Sam came from a village. So, they were particularly sure that the noble families will definitely get their hands on him. Philip along with Paul, Freya, Haley, Marvin went to Sam's mansion and found no one. Then they all sighed. They didn't understand why Sam wanted to leave the city temporarily just after he bought the house until they returned to their own homes yesterday. They thought Sam is in big trouble. But they soon got the news that Sam is nowhere to be seen. Last night most of them saw the ugliness of the world as well as their family. While they were thinking like that in the mansion, the person they are concerned about is practicing his new techniques in the divine dimension. One month passed on outside. But Sam spent about 10 months in the second floor of the tower. All he did was practice his techniques. Since he can imagine anything inside the second floor of the tower, Sam used it to his maximum ability. He practiced his hand-to-hand combat using his attribute powers. He just practiced the same basics over and over again until he was mentally exhausted and sick of doing it again. He practiced the same basic movements tens of thousands of times, if not 100,000 times. He followed the principle of one of the very few people in his previous life. It was none other than Bruce Lee. As Bruce Lee once said, "I am not afraid of a fighter who practices 1,000 kicks. But I am afraid of a man who practices a kick for 1,000 times." From this quote, Sam experienced the result for himself in his last lifetime. Even a basic punch is a deadly attack from a fighter who really knows how to use it. That is the reason Sam just keep on practicing his basics. Other than the hand-to-hand combat, Sam also practiced the staff techniques and archery to increase his arsenal of attacks. He picked archery to practice long-range attacks. Even though he was pretty skilled in all different types of guns in his previous life and is even skilled in making it, he really doesn't want to bring the guns out as of this moment. Sam always felt like the guns are most dangerous in humans' hands. Even though they can't provide the damage as big as bombs and stuff, guns make people realize their toxic ideas easier. A man with gun in a hand feels superior to others and wants to be treated as a superior. That is how it happened in his previous world, and Sam felt like it won't be much different in this world. So, if he made some guns, he would only use them himself. Apart from improving his combat skills, Sam also started studying formations and inscriptions. He first felt puzzled as he saw both the formations and inscriptions put together. But later when he studied, he realized that they both are completely analogous. They have a vast number of similarities. An inscription is the way of condensing the spiritual energy in a certain form in a certain place according to requirement of the inscription master. Whereas the formation is guiding the energy in a certain way and do a certain work by converting into a certain work. The most common thing in both is that they both require the energy nodes. The runes are used as the nodes in case of inscriptions and the formation flags or other objects as energy nodes. From another perspective, both formations and inscriptions can be combined as well as interchanged. That means the runes of the inscriptions or the inscriptions itself can be used as the energy nodes for formations, or the formation principles can be used to guide the energy flow to create an inscription. Sam came to this conclusion after a long time of hypotheses and contemplation, and result baffled him so much that he felt so shocked of his own thought process. The final completion of the inscription and formation merging is creating the array disk. This is a process of condensing the formation itself into the disk using inscriptions. That is the reason why both of them are grouped together. From the look of it, Sam thought that it is not impossible to create his own self-created inscriptions and formations if he tried and experimented, by observing and manipulating the energy flow. After all, observation and manipulation are both his innate core abilities. After having these thoughts, Sam suddenly felt like these people are really stupid. All these inscription masters and formations only work on how to memorize the nodes and the process to achieve an already set inscription or formation. They don't really care about how and why these things are working like that. They have this much of valuable resource, but these things are such a waste in a people like this. They can't really use them for their full potential. Sam inwardly lamented when he was studying the inscriptions and formations. He had almost completed all the wisps related to the subject. After all, Sam himself is a genius and he can clearly understand all the theoretical knowledge easily. The problem is he can't really make them practically. He could be considered as one of the most knowledgeable people, theoretically, this field. But his practical skills are completely restricted by his own cultivation base. Sam sighed thinking of his cultivation base. After 1 month in the outside world passed, Sam came out of his tower. But he still stayed in the divine dimension. At this moment the garden of different climatic zones is not as empty. Yunwu went back to the lava rock village and brought back a type of grass that is suitable for the bulls. The heaven spirit silk moths can eat any type of leaves. The environment in the garden is filled with various elemental spiritual energy. So, the silk moths are divided into various groups and are kept in different regions. There are a total of 3 moths that broke through to the level 3 beasts, and they are from 3 different attributes: fire, metal and ice. This made Sam extremely delighted as he would get a new type of resource. Other silk moths are kept in the normal zone when they are cocooned, as Sam needed this type of silk as well. The bull beasts are still in the evergreen family. The most major things happened to the panther cubs as they finally grew up a little. They are now at size of an adult panther of the modern Earth. But in this world, these are still considered as slightly grown cubs. These panthers are happily playing around in the volcanic zone. As soon as they saw Sam arrived, they immediately pounced on him as they happily licked his face. Sam smiled as he struggled to get up. These are now at level 1 beasts at middle stage. You seem to be enjoying yourself. Suddenly a voice came from behind. Sam turned around and saw a majestic-looking 3-legged golden crow. Sam saw it and smiled. Yunwu has a deer-like corpse under its talons. Sam smiled at Yunwu. Here, I have been waiting for you to take your share. Yunwu said as he transmitted a large amount of spiritual energy to Sam. Sam put the cubs aside and accepted the energy as he stood straight. This is a daily routine for them. As Sam cultivated in the myriad beast bloodline technique, he doesn't need to cultivate himself. His contract beasts will share the spiritual energy equally with him and vice versa. Since Sam was busy the whole time, Yunwu was the only one cultivating for both of them. But it is not slow at all. Yunwu can cultivate using the spiritual energy inside the garden since he is a beast. And on top of that, beasts can increase their cultivation as long as they consume the flesh of others. So, Yunwu has no problem because it has vast woods to hunt. So, in the past few months, Yunwu reached limit of initial stage level 2 and Sam is at 3rd stage acolyte stage. This rate of improvement is quite high, even it is considered in 10 months time frame. But the outside flow time only 1 month. Sam slowly digested the spiritual energy as he sat cross-legged. After some time Sam opened his eyes and looked at Yunwu and said, "Let's go and see outside." As he spoke, Sam waved his hands and both of them landed on his bed. Yunwu already changed into his raven form. Sam took the crystal from the bed and placed it back on the ring and walked downstairs while Yunwu was still on his shoulder. As soon as they came downstairs into the living room, the mansion door opened and 5 people entered the room. They are none other than Philip and others. Looking at Sam, all of them were surprised. but the two girls were more than just surprised as they saw Sam and blushed as they averted their gaze. Because Sam right now didn't wear anything on his upper half of the body. He is only wearing pants and his well-defined chest and torso are fully exposed. Sam didn't feel anything strange as he invited them. "Come on guys, sit here," Sam said with a faint smile. Then only Philip and others came out of the daze. "Sam, when did you arrive?" Philip said as he made his way to the chair and sat down. The other two boys also exchanged greetings, but the two girls didn't say a single word. Sam didn't think much at first and sometime later he noticed that they are completely silent. "Sam, you don't know how popular you are. Almost all the big family's representatives came here very often in the past month to meet you. But all they got to see is your empty house or us sitting here like this." Marvin spoke without thinking much. But this statement made the already gloomy mood of the girls further down. Then the atmosphere suddenly turned awkward. Sam finally understood why the two girls are like that. "Seems like I am quite popular, huh? Ms. Freya, Ms. Haley. I did friendship with you and I don't have any relationship from your family. So, please don't feel guilty about it," Sam said to ease the atmosphere. Sam didn't blame these girls. He might be the cold and ruthless type, but he really is not so petty to blame the younger generation for the decisions of their elders. Both the girls looked at him with gratitude and were about to say something. But when they looked at Sam's naked upper half, they blushed again and looked down again. "What happened again?" Sam asked in confusion. "Sam, you probably should wear something," Paul said in low voice. Then only Sam realized what is happening and immediately took a sleeveless vest from the spatial ring and wore it. "Ms. Haley, I can understand why Ms. Freya is like that, but why are you behaving like that?" Sam asked Haley, who was also clearly feeling guilty. Haley just stayed silent. Instead Marvin answered, "Well, Haley is City Lord's daughter." "Oh," Sam acknowledged and stayed silent for a while. Then he continued, "Ms. Haley, Ms. Freya, your dresses will be ready by the next month. But I am not doing it completely with the feathers. I have some new ideas. But you should still pay after the work is done. I will give you the discount though," Sam said, completely changing the topic. Both girls looked a little startled and finally smiled. Seeing this, others also smiled and they soon went back to their cheerful selves. After some time Sam took out a list and handed it over to Marvin and said, "Marvin, can you buy these for me?" As he said that, Sam gave him the list and was about to pass him some spirit stones in the leather pouch. But was immediately stopped by Philip. "Sam, it is better if you don't take out the fire spirit stones now. The topic of these fire spirit stones is still sensitive. So, it's better to pay using normal spirit stones," Philip said. "But I don't have any normal spirit stones," Sam said awkwardly. Hearing this, everyone was dumbfounded. Then Philip came out of his daze and said, "Then Paul will accompany Marvin. He will exchange your fire spirit stones with the normal spirit stones with my father, and then they will buy you the items that you want," Philip said after some thinking. "Sure," Sam said and handed over the pouch to Paul. Now their previous awkwardness is completely wiped out. Paul took the pouch while Marvin looked through the list. The more he read, the more he opened his mouth wide. He came out of his daze and looked at Sam in bewilderment and asked, "Sam, why do you need so many items? What are you going to do?" "Let me see," Philip asked as he grabbed the list, and he also got shocked. He then said to Sam, his wide open, "Sam, when did you start dabbling in the formations and inscriptions?" This time Haley and Freya also lost their cool. He knew inscriptions and formations. Since when did he know? Where did he learn those? This was thought in everyone's mind. Sam didn't bother to reply. He instead turned towards Marvin and spoke. "Please get them as quick as possible. If you are left with change, bring formation flags." The list contained all the items that are required to create any type of formation or inscription. The items include every type of material required to create even the most complex of the first-rank inscription or the formation. Marvin nodded and went outside along with Paul. The rest just chatted leisurely. It already became evening by the time Marvin and Paul came back. When they came back, they saw that Sam and others are still in the living room and two panthers are also playing around. Both Marvin and Paul were exhausted as they dropped onto the chairs. For visiting. Sam, next time you better give me compensation for that tiresome job. We had to buy all the items in different shops to not to get suspected, and it has been evening by the time it was completed. Marvin said in an exhausted tone. Everyone looked at Paul. He didn't say anything, but from his expression, they all understood that his is in same state as Marvin. Sure, Sam said as he spread his hand towards hand. Marvin took a spatial ring and passed over to Sam, and Sam passed over his own empty spatial ring. Sam checked all the items in satisfaction. Then he looked at them and said, "Guys, I need to tell you something." Everyone looked at him and waited for him to continue. "I will be going outside the city again and will be back 1 month later," Sam said with a straight face. Everyone stayed silent with a dumbfounded gaze and then looked at each other. "Then why did you come at all?" Freya asked. "It is a bit troublesome to buy all these things," Sam said again with a straight face. Hearing his reply, Marvin and Paul looked at each other pitifully. They wanted to cry, but no tears came. Philip and others also looked at them and sighed. "You came all the way back just make us run your errands." This is the thought in everyone's heads.